Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Ukraine Update from Compass Media. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. Every week I'm joined by John Moran, former head of the foreign desk for the Irish Press, and we overview the week's developments in terms of what's happening in the NATO-Ukraine-Russia war, and also some of the political developments in Ukraine as well. Thanks for joining us this week, John.
Hi, Finbar. As Russia claims to have destroyed a US Patriot missile system in Kiev with a supersonic missile, the city of Artemsk, formerly known as Bahkmut, is now close to capture by the Wagner forces as they close in on the remaining holdouts of Ukrainian forces in the city. In the main holdout area, the citadel, only the Domino quarter now remains under Ukrainian control. The sector is currently being stormed by Wagner Group soldiers who have now taken the first line of defense in the Domino sector. Today, Washington is assessing the damage to Patriot missile systems after the Kiev attack by a supersonic Kinzhal missile. Kiev has two Patriot systems, so they may have a second one operating in the Kiev region. Should Russia have destroyed one of the two Patriot missile systems, this will be a huge blow to American prestige and even damage future sales prospects for the missile system. To the southwest of the Artemsk front, Russian forces have destroyed two road bridges, one in Chasiv Yar and one in Krasny. One of the bridges was a motorway used to bring reinforcements into Artemsk. These bridges had been left unscathed until now to allow Ukrainian armed forces to enter the Artemsk meat grinder trap created by Russian forces. Now, however, the blown bridges will hamper any reinforcements and allow the Wagner Group to concentrate on mopping up operations to eliminate the remaining resistance in the city. Some observers predict Artemsk will totally collapse by the end of the week. Should this happen, it will be a huge blow to Ukraine, who pledged to defend Artemsk to the bitter end. The fall of Artemsk will also release thousands of Wagner fighters to do battle elsewhere on the front lines. We should bear in mind that while the capture of Artemsk will be a boost to Russian forces, its capture is not the primary intention of the operation there. What the Russian forces set out to do in Artemsk was to destroy as much of the Ukrainian army as possible in a war of attrition in and around the city. In the Kupiansk region of Kharkiv today, Russian forces had a positive result for the last 3-day battles, where unexpectedly Russian forces were able to capture a bridgehead on the right bank of the Oskol River and were able to hold it, repelling several Ukrainian counterattacks. Depleted uranium fears. In the town of Khmelnytsky yesterday in western Ukraine, Russian missiles destroyed an enormous arms and ammunition depot. The resulting explosion caused a huge mushroom cloud that some likened to the aftermath of a nuclear bomb. It has been reported that depleted uranium shells for the British Challenger tanks were among the ordnance that was destroyed, sparking fears of toxic contamination in Khmelnytsky and in the surrounding countryside. Earlier today, Russian armed forces carried out a high-precision group attack on a large ammunition depot at the shipyard in Nikolaev. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the targets have been destroyed. These attacks on military and fuel depots hit Ukraine forces particularly hard because they were reportedly running out of ammunition before the recent upsurge in military aid from NATO countries. Now, 3 major military depots have been destroyed in a matter of days. These huge military depot losses will infuriate NATO advisors who had been urging Ukraine to initiate its counteroffensive long before now. Bloggers detained for Kiev attack posts. 6 bloggers who published images of attacks on Kiev have been arrested by the Ukrainian secret police. criminal proceedings have opened against them, and they could face up to 8 years in prison. 10 civilians killed in Ukrainian shelling of Donetsk. Meanwhile, in Donetsk, 10 more civilians, including children, have been killed by shelling in the city by Ukrainian forces over the past few days. As Ukrainian forces come under increased pressure from Russian assaults, they respond by targeting civilians in Donetsk. Friends of Ukraine urge end to conflict. According to Seymour Hersh, a group of European states led by Poland are secretly calling on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to end the conflict. These states include Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia.
Thanks for that, John. And that's just a brief overview. Let's have a chat about some of those matters before we look at some other stories from Ukraine as well. In terms of Bahkmut, it's really the final line of defense is residential houses, a row of newly built residential houses. That's what's left of the Ukrainian defense in not just Western Bahkmut, but in Bahkmut generally, or what may be called now Artemsk, since the Russians seem to control practically the entire city. It's the final row of defense. Can we call it now, John?
Well, it's a little too early, but there is still lots of activity going on further to the north of Bahkmut, which comprises some of the city. And that will be another area that will have to be come under control of the Russians before they can say they have taken Bahkmut. But certainly the position of the Ukrainian soldiers now in Bahkmut is desperate. All they have now is very low-rise residential housing to protect them, while the Russian forces are shooting from tall buildings against them. They haven't a hope of holding out in the Domino district of Bahkmut, of Artemsk, I should say.
Yeah, and I'm told, and the analysis appears to be that overall the Russian MO has been to allow the Ukrainian forces to come into Bahkmut as they do in other areas. They don't blow up the bridges, they don't impede, and it's a strategy to draw them in to eliminate the resources, both unfortunately manpower as well as machinery. But the evidence coming out is that where they were allowing transportation into the city, the Russians, they've now cut off those fields. And it's almost like the Russians saying, okay, end game now, guys. We feel we've done all we can in Bahkmut to limit your resources and to take out your resources. End game now, Bahkmut's closing.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, because beyond the Domino district, there are just open fields all the way to Chaziv Yar. And they will be sitting ducks as they try and escape from that particular area. Unless, and it's still possible, that the Ukrainians mount some form of an action to get the bulk of their soldiers out unscathed. But it's going to be a tricky task.
A bloodbath, I think, is probably...
Oh, awful. It's going to be awful.
Sadly. In the village of Khmelnytsky as well, or outside of it, you reported earlier about a massive explosion of what was an arms dump. It wasn't in a residential or in an urban area. It was outside of it. But the size of the explosion, I think the last explosion on this planet like that possibly was the Beirut explosion a number of years ago in the port of Beirut. It was a massive explosion the other day. Reports are coming out that hundreds of millions of euros worth of missiles were destroyed, uranium-tipped missiles possibly given by the UK, and there apparently has been an increase in radioactivity levels in that area.
That's right. It has been reported. The higher levels of radioactivity have been reported both in the city and outside in the countryside. This will be a terrible state of affairs if it turns out to be true and you have depleted uranium all over. Although it's very interesting in this case because this particular town is in western Ukraine. It's not in eastern Ukraine. So there's lots of local horror at the idea of there being depleted uranium in the region.
And the wind is blowing westward as well towards Poland. You know,
Yes, it is.
yeah. Like, what the hell? The reality is, what the hell is the UK, first of all, sending uranium-tipped missiles over there in the first place for? And secondly, why do uranium-tipped missiles exist on this planet? You know, it's insane. We've seen the results in Iraq and other countries where they've been used, the long-term results, how it causes birth defects for generations later. And the fact that the British government willy-nilly sent them over to Ukraine is an absolute disgrace. But apparently it's coming back on the Ukrainians, and this may be an opportunity to take those types of weapons out of this conflict at least.
Yes, well, we should hope so. I mean, if it is the case that they have been blown up, in one way, it's good that it won't be spread over a much larger area as the shells are fired from tanks and it's concentrated in one particular area. But nonetheless, we have no doubt from past experience of the use of depleted uranium shells that terrible injuries occur many years after the event.
And that dust went up a few kilometers into the air anyway. So normally, you know, there are individual explosions at a low level, but this was a massive explosion with very high temperatures, which converted the uranium into dust and into other chemicals, in fact. And we don't know where it's going. It's up in the wind. We won't try to scare the living daylights out of people about it, but it just shows the dangers of using these types of weapons. John, you also mentioned the allegations that there has been a Patriot missile system, a US Patriot missile system taken out in or around Kiev. And so there's to and froing about whether this has happened or not. But there is video that we're going to show now of what purports to be that particular Patriot missile system in operation in Ukraine and it being taken out. And it would appear to fire off its entire ammunition load before it's hit with something.
Yes, it did.
We'll have a look at this video, John, and we'll come back.
Sure.
What do you make of that, John? The idea that the invincible Patriot missile system was taken out, and why would it fire all those missiles at nothing? It appears.
Yeah, well, what's interesting to me is I see that the Ukrainians are denying that there was any damage to any Patriot missile system. However, the Americans are saying there has been damage, but it's not that much. Now, if you look at the actual images coming from Kiev, you will see that shortly after the batteries of the system fire into the sky, most of them together in a very short period. They hold about 30, 32 missiles, but they all went off at the very end. And the speculation is that they were aware that there was an incoming missile and they were getting rid of those so that they too wouldn't explode when the missile hit.
And cause greater damage to the
Yeah,
surrounding area.
you can actually see after the last of the rockets are fired, you can see a big explosion on the ground, which some are saying is the hitting of the missile of the Kinzhal.
It's just amazing the confusion in news that comes out, even from official sources in Ukraine and in the United States. Another example this week of that is claims made by the politicians in Ukraine that Ukrainian forces, air defense, shot down a Russian hypersonic missile, even though Ukrainian air defense operators, the senior people, are constantly saying that they did not shoot this hypersonic missile down. This confusion that's out there, it's been reporting all around the West that they did, and it would be quite an achievement if they did. But the missile operators themselves are saying they did not.
You know, when you listen to what the Ukrainian spokespeople say, you can take it with a grain of salt. I mean, for example, they said that they knocked out 6 Kinzhal missiles over Kiev last night. Absolute nonsense. But they can say whatever they like because no one will ever challenge them on it.
And isn't that the unfortunate thing? Talking about challenging people, Ukraine has had a contemporary, you might say, label of being quite a corrupt country, one of the most corrupt countries in Europe anyway. Zelensky was accused by Seymour Hersh, who you mentioned earlier, the renowned journalist. He was accused of skimming off $400 million, him and his mates, off money that was supposed to go given to Ukraine for fuel for the military, and that they skimmed $400 million off that. We have a story that came out in the last few days from Ukraine about a Supreme Court judge that took a whopping fine and has been arrested for taking a whopping fine of $3 million. We'll just have a look at this headline and we'll chat about this. So here we have a picture that was put out online, which is alleged to be some of the money that was seized from this Supreme Court judge. And what is this, John, from the point of view that it's unusual, the idea, if you're in a corrupt country, very corrupt country, that you be arrested for corruption. Why is this judge being arrested? Is it because it's such a high amount of money? Or what do you think about this? It just seems a bit unusual for me.
Well, it could be, some sort of performative act to show that they're tackling the notorious corruption that they have. Now, you must remember that it is the most corrupt country in Europe, and the currency of these countries that have corruption is lies. Nobody knows what to believe. Information is power, and power is money. So all of that gets skewed in Ukraine. You could have somebody who was jealous of the amount somebody was making and ratted on them. There's all sorts of reasons why this happens. But if the Supreme Court judge is bent, what hope have you?
I suppose there could be some value in what you're saying, that this is a token gesture to send a message to the financiers of Ukraine, the West, that they're doing something about corruption, and yet at a much higher level and on much bigger financial terms. We have the likes of Zelensky creaming over 400 million for funds that are supposed to go for fuel to the military. It's quite shocking. And we have a story here as well, John, a wee video from the UK, of the UK Foreign Minister, making clear that for now anyway, Ukraine is not going to receive fighter jets from the UK. We'll have a look at this. We'll come back in 1 wee minute.
Well, first of all, Britain isn't going to donate any fighter jets to Ukraine at this time. Typhoon is, we've been consistent in saying we're not going to deliver Typhoon Tranche 1. Is not a plane that would be suitable, but also we make the clear point that this is not about gifting weapon systems. This is gifting a platform, and with that, if anyone follows Formula One, you don't just gift a car; you have to gift a pit team of hundreds of people. And none of us standing here, no European nation is going to put British forces or British Air Force personnel into Ukraine in the middle of that war zone. We've always been clear on that. What we are talking about, and it links to the earlier question, is resilience of Ukraine. How can Ukraine stand firm after this? How they can deter, and they will need more fighter capability. So starting the basics of helping train cohorts of Ukrainians for the long term to fly aircraft, whichever aircraft they choose to buy or develop, is what's important now to discuss. And, Ukraine have expressed, I think, a preference for F-16s. We don't hold those in our inventory.
Promises, 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 John. We heard there was going to be no tanks. We heard there was going to be no uranium-tipped missiles. Now we hear there's going to be no fighter jets. What do you think about this?
Well, again, you don't know what game is being played, because how many times have we heard that there'll be no tanks, there'll be no modern tanks, there'll be no long-distance, long-range weapons will be handed, and in the end they are handed over. I mean, you've got to think that if you wanted to keep this war going, this is how you would do it. You'd give them enough to keep going, not enough to win, enough to keep going. And they want this thing to go on as long as possible to weaken Russia. That is the objective here. And unfortunately, as we said before, the Ukrainian people are suffering because of it.
And the bodies pile higher and higher.
Yes, they do.
And the graveyards fill up. Every week there's videos of Ukrainian cemeteries or graveyards coming out, and they're just shocking. They're full of fresh graves, acres and acres.
And they have the images of the young men on the gravestones, which make it even worse. Smiling faces, it's tragic in the extreme.
Did any of us think that we'd be here 18 months ago?
No, nobody did. But somebody knew we'd be here, the ones who planned it.
Yeah. Mr. Biden and his mates, I think, knew. On a final note, we have a video. Donald Trump was asked on TV during the week who he wanted to win in the Ukraine war. We'll have a look at this video and we'll come back.
Absolutely.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people and breaking down this country. Now,
you said you don't think in terms of winning and losing. Mr. President, can I just follow up on that, because that's a really important statement that you just made there. Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying. Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying. And I'll have that done. I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done. You need the power of the presidency to do it.
But you won't say that you want Ukraine to win. You know
what I'll say? I'll say this. I want Europe to put up more money, because they're in for 20 billion. We're in for 170, and they should be. And they should equalize. They have plenty of money. They should equalize. I got with NATO. When I sat down, I got them to put up hundreds of billions of.
So there's former U.S. President Donald Trump and possibly future U.S. President Donald Trump making clear that he is not taking sides in this in terms of who he wants to win. He wants the killing to stop. What do you make of that, John?
Well, I mean, it's true to form for him, believe it or not. He's always been the opposite to a hawk on war. He has got himself involved in a few situations, such as in Syria. But in Syria, where he attacked a Syrian air base, he told the Syrians he was going to do it beforehand. He did kill the Soleimani, the Iranian general, that was wrong, very wrong, and caused a lot of problems in the region. But compared to the rest of them, he's a dove.
And then you have on the other side the presidential nominee, or at least candidate to be the Democratic nominee, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's talking this language as well, and he's talking about the language of peace. There does seem to be an opportunity, a political opportunity, to get out of this crisis, to reverse out of this crisis at the next US elections, and possibly before it, because maybe as the language of peace that Donald Trump and Kennedy are speaking becomes more powerful in terms of it reverberating across the United States and influencing across the United States, there is a possibility that the Biden camp might soften their tone. Not necessarily that they'll actually really do anything, but they might at least soften their tone. What do you think about that thesis?
Well, I would love the idea of Kennedy going forward, because anything he says, I can't disagree with him. I mean, he's very much in the anti-war camp, and he has particularly good reason to be so, because his family suffered a lot for their opposition to the military-industrial complex, and they were working against that at the time they both died, the two Kennedy brothers. So to see this Kennedy come along, I mean, it will be wonderful.
Yeah, he does bring hope. But he's all, himself and Trump are forcing the debate to have two sides, and that's but hopefully they won't be shut down like Kennedy was shut down on discussing COVID on some US channels where he was heavily censored. But we'll just have to watch out for that. John, that's all we have for tonight. Folks, thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share where you can. It's very difficult to get through these algorithms, especially when we're trying to bring balanced news on Ukraine. So thanks for tuning in, and give it a share if you can. John, thanks for joining us. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thank you, Finbar.